We came at it with like a consumer product kind of mindset. This has to be something that you kind of teach your grandmother how to use, and it has to be something that they see value in very quickly, because they're not going to do like months long IT projects. The time and the money, right, is kind of a non-starter for most of them. So we said, let's build something that can get. But in terms of like selling manufacturing equipment, it really is identifying like product line. If it's still like early in the risk phases of the development, you're working with R&D. But
Right.
once it's kind of more mature, it's about identifying kind of the applications and products in which that solution can really make a difference. Don't you want to store your critical files in the cloud? And actually they're like, no, what happens if we lose internet? And it's like, what? Like,
Alex, it's great to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for doing this.
thanks for having me.
You've had a very interesting career spanning sales and BD operations within advanced manufacturing companies. At Protean, what we're trying to do is build operating infrastructure for companies that have the potential to grow, and manufacturing and related industries is one of our focus areas. As we speak with more and more founders, actually, we realize that sales and BD has been one of the most challenging aspects of growing their businesses, and specifically in manufacturing. And so, very, very excited.
Great. Yeah, looking forward to it.
So, you've spent over a decade in manufacturing. Why don't you share with us a little bit about your journey and what actually ultimately led you to start Uptool?
Sure. Yeah. So I studied mechanical engineering and product development engineering. And I've spent, the last 15, 16 years doing something manufacturing related. I started in 3D printing with one of the legacy 3D printing companies called Stratasys. But living in Silicon Valley, I quite quickly got the itch to build, and joined one of the first like very well funded, noteworthy kind of 3D printing startups called Carbon 3D about a decade ago. And since then have done three other startups in between that were either 3D printing or robotic kind of automation manufacturing equipment. So essentially four startups in a row that were all developing some new way of making things, that involved hardware, software, in some cases material development too. And then about 2 years ago, partnered up with my co-founder and our CEO, Benny Buller, who had also spent his career in sort of advanced manufacturing technology. He was previously the founder CEO of Velo 3D, a successful metal 3D printing company. And we both were frankly kind of burnt out on these like really capex heavy, hard tech, slow moving kind of complex machine businesses, where you spend your life kind of fundraising, and uh, you know the development cycles are very long. The validation cycles are very long, and we'd both done a few of these companies, and we said, maybe it was a like grass is greener thing, but we said, hey, let's see what set of problems we can tackle with pure software. Let's try to build a, kind of lean organization that can move very quickly, but make a big impact. Something that, once we kind of find that product market fit, can scale quickly. Is
Right.
one of the problems with our previous businesses too. It's like, even if once you get it working, you make that first machine, and then the customer tells you, perfect, I need 20 of these to build the production line. It's like, oh, okay, give me 3 more years, right? Um, so we're like, look, there's some really big problems to solve in manufacturing. Some of
Right.
them are very, very complicated and involve a lot of physical things. But there are some, like we think, low-hanging fruit where we can just help businesses run better, move faster,
Mm.
by automating a lot of the paperwork and busy work and operational kind of business operational layer that you see in small high mix manufacturers, that really bogs them down, that really slows them down. So that was really the vision for Uptool. It was how do we build software that can really accelerate our small high mix manufacturers in
Yeah.
the US, starting with machine shops and fabrication shops, if people are familiar with that, cutting metal, shaping, welding metal. It's all there's hundreds of thousands of these small high mix manufacturers that, people drive past every day, but probably never notice, or know about this part of the kind of economy. But these are the guys making the parts that are going into everyone's cars and planes and phones and TVs and
Yeah.
buildings, right? You name it. It's really the backbone of like the industrial like hardware world.
Very interesting because, whenever people talk about industrial automation today or manufacturing today, robotics comes to mind or hard tech comes to mind. And in one of your recent podcast episodes as well, you mentioned that the real opportunity or one of the several opportunities is in business automation. And that sort of speaks to what you just told me about UpTools, right? So, very, very cool. And I would love for you to sort of double click on business automation opportunity that you are seeing in the US today.
I think, just first of all, there's a few things that we definitely need to get right, if we want to modernize our manufacturers
Yeah.
here and make them more competitive. One is physical automation for sure. There's definitely a need to implement robotic solutions that can really help make our manufacturing base more efficient, more agile. But we're focused on the sort of digital automation side.
Right.
There's a lot of time, a lot of labor, a lot of hours, a lot of bottlenecks caused by sometimes very simple things like ordering materials and responding to a customer's email and
Yeah.
seeing an order in your inbox and reconciling it against a quote um and these bottlenecks just kind of build up. Like they build up when we look at the time it takes to typically get a custom part made in the US, like through machining or fab. It's like on average like over a month to from like first RFQ to getting a quote to comparing quotes to ordering it and then having that manufacturer go through the steps to make it and inspect it and ship it. And when we actually look at like the work that's being done, like the actual execution time, it's hours, right? It's on the scale of hours. And um and another way to kind of prove this point is that like if you actually do have a very special relationship with like a local manufacturer and you need something done in a pinch and they owe you one, like you can get a part the same day in
Yeah.
theory or
Oh,
the next
wow.
day, right? So like it shows you kind of the extreme of how fast they can move, but we don't move that fast.
What percentage of the manufacturing activity is actually served by the small manufacturers in the US then in that case, right?
I can tell you because we've studied very closely machining, fabrication work in the US, which is over $100 billion kind of industry. 98% of the businesses doing that sort of work are SMBs.
Right.
Um, 90 90%, something like that, are under 100 people. About half of them are under 10 people. So the majority of them are very small businesses.
Right.
Everyone's always focused on the sexy kind of,
Yeah.
hard tech problems that you can kind of see and solve with like cool new tech. But my co-founder Benny and I like have spent enough time working with small manufacturers that we just saw, wow, like there's so many easy problems to solve
Yeah.
here, and it's not easy in all regards, but like simple compared to inventing, new technology, right? It's really just about, especially in the age of AI, how do we leverage these AI models, which are getting just smarter and smarter by the day, to help humans work alongside humans to make their business run a lot faster, to sort of break up those bottlenecks, to accelerate things and, let them focus on the real critical judgment, expertise driven tasks that they really got in the business to do, to really manufacture stuff and then basically try to automate as much as we can of the kind of front back office work so they can focus on that core competency.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. When I was back in India, I helped government school teachers convert their paper, pencil, attendance sheets, etc., to digital systems. And it was so interesting. But I think the hardest part was to convince the teachers to start using those systems because they were just not used to it. And they were also on the older side and therefore not receptive to a lot of the feedback that we were providing them with. Like, what are these people like, right? Like, who are these
Yeah,
SMBs? Where do they come from? Which states are they in? I would love
yeah,
to get some more sense.
yeah. And your story resonates because we spend time with hundreds of small high mix manufacturers now, and
Yeah.
there's a pretty big cohort of them that really have not changed the way that they do business at all with like since the internet. Like the
Wow.
internet has not changed how they run their company.
Wow.
And and you go in there and they're still running like on-prem software, right? It's all running locally. And you're like, couldn't you guys at least benefit from some like cloud backup or
Yeah.
like, wouldn't you rather run the QuickBooks Online version? I think they're discontinuing the desktop version. And like, don't you want to store your critical files in the cloud? And actually they're like, no, 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 what happens if we lose internet? And it's like, what? Like, it's like, what happens if your building burns down and you have this server in the back, and then they're always like, oh, if there's a fire, like the first thing I'm grabbing is that server, then maybe I'll help my children out the door. Um, but anyway, so there's a large cohort of manufacturers that unfortunately are like living in the last century still in terms of their kind of IT stack. Some of them, that we talk to are like, we just decide, hey, this is your textbook kind of laggard, technology laggard.
Yeah.
We're not gonna like. It's hard enough to convince them to about AI and about sort of modern, software tools. You're not going to convince them to like not be scared of the internet at this
Right.
point. Like that's someone else's job. That's not a startup's job. So some of them you just have to move on, right? You try to find your sort of early adopter, technology enthusiast kind of mindsets.
Right.
But there's still there's a lot of education. There's a lot of helping them kind of see the light, see what's possible. We try to design our product, and I can talk more about our first product, which is around helping
Yeah.
manufacturers quote a lot faster, which can really kind of increase their sales. And um, and we designed it like I think with our eyes wide open about how difficult it was to implement software to be successful building software for small manufacturers. So
Yeah.
we tried to simplify this thing as much as we could. We came at it with like a consumer product kind of mindset. This has to be something that um, you kind of teach your grandmother how to use, right? And it has to be something that they see value in very quickly because they're not going to do like months long IT projects. The time and the money, right, is kind of a non-starter for most of them. So we said, let's build something that can basically be implemented, onboarded, trained, configured within an hour, where they can see almost immediate kind of value and ROI to ensure this can be successful. So sorry to throw in the kind of product plug there, but it was kind of a segue into how we thought about that.
And very importantly, I was very curious that how did you even figure out that coding would be the first function to get into? And how does that actually even translate into how these SMBs really measure their performance, right? Because as you said, financial constraints is definitely one of the factors when you're working with these SMBs. So yeah, how did you figure that out? And why was coding so important?
Well, I don't think it was like this like eureka moment. I think
Right.
we just spent enough time with small manufacturers. And one thing we did do, like from just like a startup kind of methodology perspective, is like Benny and I have done enough startups now that we knew we didn't want to just run at the first idea that we had. We
Yeah.
wanted to actually like really peel the onion on these businesses and really kind of ask why a bunch of times and understand like across a kind of diverse set of them, like how they really operate, what are the real problems to be solved and what is solvable. So we spent months before we wrote like a single line of code. we spent months just being a fly on the wall in these businesses, asking a lot of dumb questions, just trying to learn before we said, okay, this is the first thing we build. But we chose quoting in a lot of ways. It kind of like grabbed us because the more time we just knocked on the door of a manufacturer, and frequently there'll be like a front desk person, and you'll ask to talk to the owner or the GM, and they'll if they're friendly enough, they'll kind of like walk by their desk, and we just noticed that these guys were and it's typically guys, but sometimes women were tied to their desk.
Yeah.
And we're like, wow, this is, let's say it's a 10-person manufacturing business. The person that started it is usually like the expert in manufacturing. It's usually like a machinist or something, right? They started this business to make like parts. They are very much like craftspeople, and they started this business because they wanted to break out on their own and make really high value parts and play their part in the economy. But they're tied to their desks doing paperwork.
Right.
And we're like, okay, well, we got to dig into like why are they tied to their desks? What are the paperwork bottlenecks here? And so much of it was just responding to customers around like the front end of an order. Like they have an RFQ or they have questions about capabilities, they have NDAs, they have quality documents, certification documents they need. There's a lot of just like front end kind of sales work. And they're the salespeople for these small businesses. And so that was just like kind of obvious to us that like if we could help them get through this work that also they didn't want to do and it was consuming them. And that coupled with the fact that they almost all have this intuition that if they can respond faster, if they can quote faster, it meaningfully increases their chances of winning business
Right.
and getting more opportunities. So that was a huge lever too. It's like, to save time, but probably more importantly, actually win more. And, just to pile on one more thing, like, when you're thinking about large like enterprise sales, right? And you have, I think we'll get more into this, but like
Yeah.
you have like all these stakeholders and then all this evaluation process and decision criteria. When you walk into a 10-person manufacturer and the owner is also the salesperson, that makes the decisions on purchasing, that is also going to be the user of the product,
Right.
that spends hours a day in pain. That's like the convergence of like you don't need a fancy like med pick methodology. It's like, hey, it's all one person,
Yeah.
just talk to them and just close them right now.
Yeah. You worked with enterprise sales clients. You have clearly seen different kinds of companies also, right? So, what, according to you, are the most important pillars of an effective sales strategy?
Yeah, I mean, like selling, I didn't come up with this term, right? But
Yeah.
selling is human, right? We've been selling each other things since the beginning of humanity, even before currency, right? We were like trading things and everything is almost everything is kind of sales, right? Like at the end of the day, whether you're a lawyer or cashier or something like that, right? Like it all involves like some exchange of goods and value. And when you're selling to manufacturers, I think, it's very hard to be prescriptive. And I wouldn't even try to be like generally prescriptive about like selling. It's so
Right.
it's so unique to what you're selling and the customer. But I think it comes down to like a few principles about like really understanding, the problem that you're trying to solve and if you and identifying whether you have a solution to that problem or not. And a lot of the time I see sales people and sales orgs spend the majority of their time trying to solve some problem that either they can't solve or they've misidentified, right? Like it just was never a fit, like it was never going to be a sale, but it took so long to get to know. So part of it is like get to know fast is one kind of sales advice. I think that's fairly general, but it's about understanding the problem you're solving, and then who does that solve a problem for, like on a human level within, if it's a bigger organization or a smaller organization, it's a lot simpler. And who is involved in, evaluating your solution, and who is involved in deciding and paying for that solution, building the justification for it. Usually, there's the larger sort of enterprise sales process you get into, there needs to be like a champion. that helps you navigate that process because there's so many internal stakeholders. You need someone that's like really the shepherd, right? Like
Right.
taking you through, guiding you through the org. But yeah, but like part of the reason that Benny and I were so drawn into helping these small manufacturers was the sort of the sales, the purity of like the sales process
Yeah.
with a small company, and like, frankly, like being able to cut out all the sort of BS of like politics and schmoozing and steak dinners and all the other stuff that you get in like big IT enterprise sales, and like just saying, hey, here's a business owner, they have a problem, and in some cases that problem is very acute. It's a matter of like survival for their business, for their family legacy sometimes, right? How do we help them solve that problem, and then just how do we get in front of them
Mm.
and and make sure that we do understand that problem and we can solve it, and demonstrate the solution to them, in a really compelling but efficient way,
Yeah.
and come up with a fair kind of agreement, right, by which we can start doing business together.
You mentioned find your champions within an organization. And some of these larger OEMs, although, are really large, right? Like they have different levels within even the manufacturing division, for instance, or automation division or whatever, right? So who are the people who are both interested in having a conversation and at the same time will be able to, I think, advocate for what your product is if it's good, obviously.
Yeah, I think you're right that like you want to start with the champion. You need to find a champion, I think, for the other pieces to fall into place.
Right.
And how do you find, and you don't really find a champion usually, you kind of develop a champion.
Ah.
Sometimes you find, I mean, again, it's hard to kind of speak very, very broadly, but like maybe if you have a very simple product that someone just like literally found online and reached out to you and they're like, I want to buy this thing, right? Just sell this to me. But like, but really, I think you're developing a champion. You're finding someone who is usually the person that feels the most kind of pain, or uh, or the person that maybe could benefit most from
Mm.
whatever you sell. Like, oh, that can help them hit their goal for the year. That can help them get that promotion. And sometimes those are very like personally driven too. But yeah, it's either that kind of like, I've heard someone refer to it as like, it's either kind of like a painkiller or a vitamin,
Well,
right? And you have to figure out kind of like what are you to each, and what is your product and where does it fit within this potential customer. But finding champions, I think is very unique to the product and the problem you're solving, and also to like the maturity of it. So like from a organizational perspective, like I've been involved a lot in selling technologies that were still like quote unquote technologies. Like they weren't really products yet. We had a great like roadmap and line of sight to how it became like a real solution that could be adopted at scale. But oftentimes when you're building manufacturing equipment or process or technology, like it starts off as like a science project,
right.
and you need to de-risk it by actually working with industry, like with working with customers, because you don't want to build um in some black box, right? And totally build the wrong thing that no one wants. So the partnerships are key, but they're like more partnerships than like sales early on, because you're trying to find those kind of like visionary technology enthusiasts that can um that can see the vision, the light at the end of the tunnel, and want to go on the journey with you, and that can partner with you to help kind of validate whatever it may be, right? Validate and help you develop it.
Yeah.
Um, so usually you're looking for someone on the sort of R&D side of the business early on, because usually you need someone to tap into like a development budget to basically do kind of a pilot, right?
Right.
Or sort of an experimental type initial engagement. But then as the product matures, yeah, you definitely want to find a champion stakeholder that is more on the commercial side of the business,
Right.
to really scale it.
Because you've sort of sold hardware, you've sold systems, subscriptions. And so, does the sales method vary? And not particularly only talking about stakeholders, but Any change in the process based on the kind of product that you're trying to sell?
At the end of the day, like to use another cliche kind of term, people are really trying to buy into some outcome. It can be packaged as a service. You could be using your equipment to make some novel new part for a
Hmm.
customer. You could be selling them the machine that makes the part. You could be selling them software that helps them make their machines
Right.
better at making parts. But at the end of the day, you're selling some sort of outcome, and you need to develop a process where you're basically as close to the kind of result as you can be. You're close to the customer as you can be to influence that outcome. And the selling process like needs to really be shaped by what does it look like for that company to evaluate and de-risk and adopt this product. And again, it's like really hard to talk about
Yeah.
generally.
Yeah.
But in terms of like selling manufacturing equipment, which I have the most experience in, like
Right.
3D printers and like robotic systems for doing automation, it really is identifying like a product line. If it's still like early in the risk phases of the development, it's you're working with R&D. But
Right.
once it's kind of more mature, it's about identifying kind of the applications and products in which that solution can really make a difference, and tying like the business, like you're going to have business stakeholders, financial stakeholders, and you're going to have like engineering design stakeholders often,
Mhm.
whether it be industrial design, mechanical design, people that are like invested in the performance and the outcome of the final product, and then people that are responsible for like the operation and financial decisions around that whole function of the business. So it gets messy for sure at scale. Deploying like new systems, if they are like truly novel, it gets kind of more and more messy as something is more and more unique.
Yeah.
But there's like fairly well understood processes, and sometimes you just have to ask the company. If you're working with big companies like Fortune 500 companies, like you don't have to like reinvent the wheel. Like ask them, how do you guys consider adopting these types of new technologies? Like I'm sure
Right.
this isn't like you've adopted new manufacturing technologies before. We're not the first one. Help educate us on how you guys think about this, and then we'll be able to work most efficiently, like, to save you guys time and pain.
An instance where in any of your companies where you've sort of sold to different kind of sectors, right? So say automotives or defense, and how do you pick which one to go with the first time, and then how do you decide the next one,
It's really
etc.?
hard. It's really hard. It's kind of like how do you get to college and how do you decide who to date or something, right? It's like it's an experimental process early on.
Yeah.
Like you got to figure out what you're good at. And I think it's okay to so at the very earliest stages of a company, I think you have to throw a wide net because you're just trying to learn as much as possible, as fast as possible. As you progress down the like technology curve, development curve, you have to become more and more focused because you can't serve every market, every application at the same time. So you need to hone in on like, I don't know, but like probably one or two things quite quickly.
Right.
But early on, you probably want to do a bunch of like, uh, without spreading yourself too thin. You want to do as many sort of experiments in parallel, with different markets. And some of those experiments may just be like paper studies, right? You may just be like digitally learning and evaluating things, but sometimes it's actually deploying systems or
Mhm.
making parts and doing physical testing. But yeah, I think you're just kind of going down this funnel where like you start wide because you just don't know. You don't know what the right path is, but you have to learn, and at a certain point you have to make some really hard decisions with incomplete information.
Yeah.
Uh, but you gather as much as you can, and you have to be decisive about picking something because yeah, I've been part of too many companies that there's just a lack of focus. and you end up developing kind of a mediocre solution for a bunch of industries, right? And then no one ends up buying it. Whereas like if you can find those when I was at Carbon, we would call them like the killer app, right? Like you got to find
Ah,
your killer app
yeah.
quickly because there's a lot of risk and time and money involved in developing a new technology. Like there has to be a strong pull. There has to be a really great outcome to justify that all.
And as you sort of start selling to your second company, say, for instance, in auto, what are the kind of results or what are the kind of outcomes that we're talking about, right? Like, will they be okay with just the deployment and then result TBD, or how does that work? And because it just seems like everything in at least advanced manufacturing is just long, right? Everything takes long. So, but then you still need that one indicator that's enough, hopefully, to convince your second customer.
Yeah, I think, in terms of within a specific industry, within a specific like vertical segment, you really want to try to go deep with one company
Ah,
because that is like let me clarify like if you're selling something that is truly novel and that customer is really involved in the development, I'm not saying that they like own IP, but they are definitely helping guide the development and they know that.
yeah.
No one wants to help partner and guide the development of something that then you just turn around and sell to their competitor tomorrow,
Mm.
right?
Right.
They put in all this effort, and then once it's done, their competitor just comes and buys it, right?
Yeah.
So if that is if that is the dynamics of your kind of product and the customer relationship, I think you're best served by really going deep and going sort of exclusive, so to speak, with one company, but you go in there with the right agreement in place that like, hey, you're going to benefit from this first. We're going to develop this. We're going to develop it for you. Maybe you have a year or two of exclusivity, but then we need to build a business here, right?
Mm.
So like we do need to go and sell this to other, but like we want to give you kind of a year or two of exclusivity to sort of get that head start and deploy this, across your whole organization, right? Really sort of maximize the benefit. But we do need to sell this to other companies, otherwise we're not going to exist to service you,
Right.
right? So then it's like you develop the playbook with that first company, and then and then whatever's negotiated, whenever you can go on to sell to that next company, it goes a lot faster.
That makes sense. Whenever we talk about sales, it's all about numbers and outcomes, et cetera, hitting targets. But nobody really talks about tenacity or resilience. And I believe that a lot of what you do as a team is also driven by human emotions. And so, you, as the sales and BD GTM leader, how did you manage, or was there a situation where, things were taking really long to sell? And then, if that was the case, then how did you manage the morale of the team, or, just how did you do that?
Yeah, I mean, like there's been like whole like books written on like quota, how to set the right quota and like what percent, how attainable should it be? And like, there's the like there's the Elon Musk school of like set goals, right? That are like basically unachievable,
Right.
but that's the fastest way to get to the goal. Then it's a really fine balance of like maintaining morale. Like people
Yeah.
don't want to work towards something that's impossible, especially when it's tied to their salary,
Right.
right? And compensation. So I don't have any like silver bullet on this one, but I've always felt that like most of the people on the team need to feel like you've set a goal that they can achieve if
Mm.
they work really hard. The second that like people feel like you've just, given them the middle finger with a quota that they'll never achieve is the second they start working on their resume. Because there's nothing more demoralizing and disappointing than like trying your hardest and knowing you can't achieve something.
Mm.
Just know, even if you take compensation out of it, just no one wants to like spend like the next year just knowing that they've set themselves up for failure.
Yeah.
So there's the sort of like personal motivation side of it. And then like in terms of like tenacity and persistence, like at a certain point you can't you can like the Charlie Munger like saying is like, show me the incentive, I'll show you the outcome.
Yeah.
You can incentivize certain outcomes, you know, extra bonuses and spiffs and like accelerators, and those things definitely work for most people like that are, financially driven. But you also need to find people that are wired that way. Some people just do not like you do not want to hear no 5 times in a day. They maybe grew up with a silver spoon in their mouth
Right.
and like always got what they want in life. And like they're not going to be the ones like cold calling all day, being told like, lose my number. So you got to find the people that like have like, and it's hard to interview for this, but like you need to find people that are like, for one, like can take a loss and can like rebound and it
Mm.
motivates them. Two, have pretty thick skin. Three, have like the ability to have enough emotional intelligence that they don't go too far, right?
Mm.
To where they like someone has a restraining order on them because they've called for the 50th time. But but they are okay kind of pushing the boundaries enough that they can make that fifth unresponded call because it
Yeah.
might be the one that makes the difference.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's helpful, but
The other thing which you talked about earlier on our first call is that you have seen different kinds of funding mechanisms play out in the several manufacturing companies that you worked with. And we know that in, hard tech specifically, venture capital may not be the right mode of capital to raise all the time beyond the early stage that founders raise for, which is often used for tech validation and so on and so forth. But what are the kinds of, or how to think about if I'm a founder building a hardware startup, and I know that I'm great at technology. Like I have a great tech team, but I have no idea as to who to raise funds from after I've done a couple of rounds from VCs. How should I think about it? What should my priorities be? And
so if you've already done a couple rounds from VCs, I don't think you have that many other options. You're once you are on the VC train, I think that you're raising money from, either VC, it kind of gets into semantics, but it's like, it's some sort of risk funding from like VCs or maybe at very later stages like private equity um type funding, growth type funding.
Right.
Um like pre-IPO or pre-acquisition. But maybe the crossroads is really at the start of the company formation, where you're like, how do I get this off the ground? And I think probably the big decision is like, is this thing like, am I going to try to bootstrap this thing? Um, or do I want to build kind of a venture scale business? Because the moment um, you start partnering, well, the moment you take kind of VC money, that comes with like a set of growth expectations that they're underwriting. And you just want to make sure that that's the goal of the company too. There are so many great, especially manufacturing companies that were built up very slowly, like organically over decades. And you could argue it's definitely like the safer, wiser way to build a business is slowly and methodically. But but venture isn't interested in slow growth, right? Like they're betting on home runs. And so I think you need to match your fundraising strategy with the investors that you find need to be aligned with your vision for how you want to build the business, the speed, the risk, the scale. Um, and I'm not an expert on, you know, venture financing or anything like that. I've been involved with a lot of companies and we've raised a lot of money. I've played a part of the process
right.
in a lot of companies and had a lot of investor meetings, but my experience is mostly coming from the, venture capital
Right.
funded company side. So I can't speak that intelligently to like all the other options.
One thing that you talked about when we were discussing sales and customers is that sometimes you build or you co-create your product with this one customer, and that customer sometimes also has a corporate venture arm, right? So, for instance, Toyota has a big one and has
Mhm.
actively invested in so many companies. I mean, this is a hypothetical situation, but then a founder may not want funding from Toyota because, you know, it just becomes like a captive situation. So, how would you think about it, or have you experienced any such situation with any of your companies?
Most corporate venture capital arms, or like CVCs,
Yeah.
that I've have experienced with, and like I've been in companies that have raised money from probably 15 to 20 different CVCs
Yeah.
now, from Boeing to BMW, um, to gosh, I can't remember what else, like in like different industries too,
Right.
like robotics companies. And for the most part, honestly, like it most of the time it doesn't really come with a lot of strings attached. Although you say yes, this money is from, in your hypothetical, Toyota. Um, the venture arms usually operate in a fairly independent way. They
Hmm.
may need to get the sort of the parents' blessing to
Right.
make the investment, but usually there can't be a lot of strings attached to the investment, for most startups, I guess, to take them seriously, because there's just a lot of options where you can get kind of pure, pure investment from VCs. You're usually not going to consider CVCs if it has like some hair on it, so to speak. Like, but it's usually like more of a handshake of like, hey, you're investing in us. We're investing in you because we think this technology is strategic
Right.
to our business, and we're going to help guide you. We were talking before about like kind of like the enterprise sales process. They
Right.
can really lubricate that process, because they understand the landscape a lot better than others, and they're usually like pretty well networked, connected, respected across the org. Um, because they're the ones going out there talking with all the technology leaders within the company, saying like, hey, what technologies do you guys need to see developed to be successful?
Mm.
Okay, we're going to go try to fund those. So this is really like symbiotic kind of relationship where if you get kind of walked into the room by a CVC, people tend to, pay attention and give that a certain amount of credibility,
Right.
um, versus like starting kind of with a completely uh, cold start. So there's a lot of benefits if your CVC is like aligned, assuming that that you have identified that, like we talked about before, is like a market you want to focus on, right? It's strategic for them, it's strategic for you. They could be a great customer. Then I think there's usually mostly pros to take an investment from a CVC. And a lot of times it's not usually like a very not exclusive type arrangement. Like you oftentimes, like I've been at companies where we've had three different automotive companies, right, that have invested, that are all competitors. So in that case, like clearly you can't be doing special deals
Right.
that are tied to the investment, but they still saw the strategic benefit to wanting to be close to that company, um and wanting that company to succeed for their success.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, thank you so much, Alex. This has been wonderful.
Hopefully, there are a few takeaways here, but yeah, it was really nice talking to you, Shreya. Hopefully we can chat again.